Now we're going to talk about the chatterbox in your brain. What we're looking at is that voice that's in your head. And everyone has it. When you're driving around, when you're moving through the world, you've got a voice in your head that's kind of narrating what's going on. So it's saying, oh, I need to get meat at the grocery store later, and I forgot to clean the house, and oh, I've got this thing tomorrow, and why is that crazy driver acting like that, and what's wrong with me, and oh my anxiety. So you have this narration constantly going in your brain. And a lot of people don't even know that that's happening. You're not even aware that there's talk happening in your brain. But once you become aware of it, very often people tell me that they feel like that is them, that voice in their head is them talking to themselves, and that's it. And that's not true. What I want you to understand about self-talk and about the voice in your head is that it's not actually you. We know it's not actually you because we're able to separate off a piece of consciousness and say, oh, I'm aware of this voice in my head, and I can think critically about it. And the voice in your head has been wrong before. That voice in your head has told you something was going to happen that didn't happen, or has told you that you felt a certain way about something when you didn't really feel a certain way about something. So we know that voice can be wrong, and we know that we can separate consciousness from that voice. So we know that voice is not actually you. It is actually an amalgam or a smush up compilation of all of the voices that have ever had influence over you. So that could be your teachers, your parents, your family, peers, religious leaders, media, politics, any of the voices culturally, personally, that have had an impact on you growing up, smush together and make this voice in your head. So if you have a background in trauma, if you have a background of having anxious attachment or negative experiences around anxiety, that is influencing that self-talk, and it's one of the reasons that your self-talk can be really negative. So some research shows that self-talk is about 75% negative for most people. That voice in the head has kind of a negative tone about 75% of the time, which is so much. And it's so uncomfortable to move through the world with your voice just going at it in your brain all the time, telling you things that aren't true, that aren't nice, that make you feel worse. And so in this course, one of the things that we really want you to do is become aware of that voice in your head and try to figure out whose voices are influencing certain thoughts. So for example, when you have a strong reaction to a stressful situation, think, whose voice is telling me this? Am I channeling my mom right now? Or is this the voice of teachers who told me things about myself? Try to identify who the voice is, and then tell that same story from a different person's voice. So if you're having a stressful response to a situation and you think, oh my gosh, this is my mom's voice in my head telling me that I'm never going to be successful, telling me that I'm never going to be able to handle this, what would it say? What would this voice in my head say if it were my friend that was telling me that? That voice would say, you're doing a great job. You know what? People make mistakes. You're doing fine. You're doing great. You can switch that voice in your head. Now, as we move through the course, we're going to talk about the neuroscience of why shifting that voice is so difficult. So right now, I'm sure you feel like, well, how am I going to even change this? So don't worry, we're going to go through that in the course. But there are three things I want you to look out for in terms of self-talk as we move through the course. One, I call them the trifecta of terror. There are three things. One is absolutes. This is when the voice in your head is telling you absolutes. You're never going to get better. You are always going to feel anxious. This is the worst thing and it's not ever going to get any better. Those absolutes where it's an all or nothing thinking, that's a red flag that self-talk is not healthy and not appropriate self-talk, because the truth is that there aren't absolutes in the world around us. So be on the lookout for absolutes in your self-talk. The second one of the trifecta of terror is exaggeration. And this is when the self-talk starts blowing up that balloon of exaggeration. So maybe you have an experience where you say something weird or you did something wrong, and your self-talk starts saying, oh, they actually aren't ever going to speak to you again. They're not going to want to be friends with you again. You're never going to have friends again. Goes into those absolutes. Exaggeration just adds on and adds on and adds on in the chatterbox in your brain. All this is happening internally. If you have severe anxiety, you are very familiar with this process of how that exaggeration balloon just gets blown up. The third piece of the trifecta of terror is repetition and rumination. And this is when you get an idea or something, a voice, a message in your head, and you just fixate on it. like, again, the example of you said something weird or you did something weird, and so you have that absolute never going to have friends again. The exaggeration comes, it gets bigger, I'm never going to have friends again. In fact, the people that I do know probably hate me, and actually this is the worst, I can't even handle this. And then you repeat that in your head. You just fixate on that thought, and that thought keeps happening and keeps happening and keeps happening, and that really embeds this negative self-talk. So as we move forward in the course, pay attention for that trifecta of terror, pay attention to whose voice it is that's telling you the messages that are in your head, and start trying to challenge them. Start trying to notice when they happen. We're going to be doing logs, or we're going to be doing things that are going to help you keep track of some of that stuff as we move through the course. But right now your task is just to notice what's happening. Just raise your awareness and notice what's happening with the chatterbox in your brain.